Okay, so managing nutrition through changing seasons. This concept is important for all horses. Doesn't matter unless it's in a stable, of course, because then it's not affected by the pasture, but doesn't matter what kind of horse it is, it gets affected if it's grazing by the pasture. So the trick to feeding through changing seasons is being able to change how much you're feeding to control body fatness and behaviour as pasture quality changes without causing mineral deficiencies in the diet. So if you imagine the situation that I'm sure some of you will be in at the moment, because it's been quite dry down here, is that right? And then you've had a little bit of rain lately, but it's been a bit too cold for much pasture to grow. So coming through winter, I'll just use an example. If you've got an eventer, you might need to feed full rates of a feed like Easy Response. So, 3.5 to 4 kilos a day of Easy Response if the horse is in a decent amount of work and on pasture that's not very good quality or not very much of it, topped up with some hay. Now, if you come into spring and all of a sudden you get a flush of ryegrass and the horse is wandering around almost up to its knees in green grass, if you kept feeding that horse 3.5, 4 kilos of a feed like that, its behaviour is probably going to change, and it will probably get quite fat. Because it's just getting too many calories, because all of a sudden it's getting a lot more calories from the grass. So the sensible thing to do would be reduce the amount of feed. Yep, you just cut the feed back, which is perfect thing to do. You have to do that. But the problem is when you cut the feed back, you also create gaps in minerals in the diet. So you've got mineral deficiency. So the whole trick is being able to adjust your feed without leaving those mineral deficiencies in the diet. So there are two main ways you can do it. You can either feed a balancer pellet, so something like the Prydes 150 pellet, and there's a bunch of balancer pellets around. Nearly every company has one these days. And then you top that up with a feed like oats or Power Pack, or you can use a combination of energy feeds. So your balancer pellet is providing always the vitamin mineral base, and it always stays in the feed at the same amount. But then you're adjusting the amount of oats or energy feed that you're using. So when it's cold in winter and the horse is working quite hard and there's not very much pasture, you might be feeding 2 or 3 kilos of the energy feed on top of the balancer pellet. And then when you come into a good season and the horse has got more pasture and the weather warms up and its calorie requirements aren't quite so high, you'd leave your balancer pellet at the same rate because it's still the vitamin mineral base of the diet, but you would adjust the amount of extra calories you're feeding in the oats or the barley or whatever the energy ingredient is that you're feeding down to match your horse's requirement on top of the better quality pasture. The other way you can do it is use a complete feed and a balancer pellet together. So I should have changed that. So use a feed. So I'm actually going to use Easy Result as the example. I've got Biomec cubes there, so just ignore that. But so use a feed. So for example, Easy Result together with a balancer pellet like the 150 pellet, and you adjust the amounts of both according to the season. And this is what Prydes call the sliding scale concept. So you're kind of sliding one feed against another. So it allows you to adjust the amount of feed you feed to control calorie intake and therefore control body fatness and also behaviour without creating mineral deficiencies in the diet. So the mineral content of the diet will always stay the same and vitamin content, but the calorie amount in each of the diets that you're feeding changes to match whatever the pasture is doing. So if the pasture quality is going up, the amount of calories in your hard feed should be coming down, and vice versa. So this sliding scale is for a 500 kilogram horse in moderate work. So can you see up here I've got diet 1, and this is one you would use when the pasture quality was excellent, and the diet is actually just 500 grams of 150 pellet a day, nothing else. You don't add Easy Result there. But as the pasture quality starts to drop, so diet 2 would be on good quality pasture, you would come back to 350 grams of the 150 pellet, but you're now adding a kilo of Easy Result. So the total calorie content of this diet with excellent pasture and no Easy Result, and of this diet with good quality pasture and a kilo of Easy Result, is going to be pretty much the same. And the mineral content is going to be pretty much the same too, because you're adjusting the amount of balancer pellet and feed according to the amounts you're feeding. So the average quality pasture diet, we're going up to 2 kilos of Easy Result and only now 150 grams of 150 pellet. Because when you're putting Easy Result in, you're putting minerals and vitamins into the diet, so you can take a little bit of the balancer pellet out because you don't need to be feeding so much. And then when we get up to diet 4, with 3 kilos of Easy Result, you don't need the balancer pellet anymore because the Easy Result is now doing the complete job of providing the vitamins and minerals in the diet. If we look at some Feed XL diet, so again, this sounds really simplistic, but again, the aim of the game is to get everything up to this line here, so you can see that 100% line there. So once you get to that 100%, that means that 100% of your horse's requirement for that nutrient, so say for copper, is being met, and there's no deficiency in there. So if we look at diet 4, we've got poor to average quality pasture. I've got 2 kilos of lucerne hay in there because it's pretty common to put a bit of lucerne hay in on top of poor or average quality pasture for a working horse. 3 kilos of Easy Result, job's done. You don't need to add anything else to that diet because all the requirements are being met. Now, if your pasture quality improves and comes up to average pasture quality, like we're saying, you go, horse is getting a bit fat or horse is getting a bit too full of energy, I'll cut the Easy Result back to 2 kilos. But if that's all you do, if you just cut the Easy Result back to 2 kilos, you've now created a whole bunch of vitamin and mineral deficiencies in there. So you've controlled your calorie intake nicely, and that's good. That's important, but there's a lot of mineral and vitamin deficiencies going on in the background that, again, you're not going to see immediately. The horse isn't going to flag you that it's, you know, a little bit selenium deficient and a little bit iodine deficient, and you won't notice for quite a while. You mightn't notice until your horse becomes arthritic a little bit earlier than it would have done had it been on a balanced diet all the time. But the deficiencies are going to be there. But if we add the 150 grams of the 150 pellet on top of that diet, so this is now diet 3 here. So we've got 2 kilos of Easy Result and 1 kilo of 150 grams of 150 pellet. Again, the diet's balanced. It's all meeting all the requirements and there's no deficiencies there. If your pasture improves even more and you go to good quality pasture and you go, need to cut my Easy Result back again, and you go back to a kilo again, that's good. You've controlled calorie intake, but now you've got mineral deficiencies. So we're not seeing the vitamin deficiencies anymore because good quality green pasture is really, really rich in vitamins. So there's not going to be vitamin deficiencies there, but copper, zinc, selenium and iodine deficiencies are going to be there, and they will cause you issues eventually. But if we add the 150 pellet again, so this is diet 2, with the 350 grams of 150 pellet again, we bump up all the intake of all of those vitamins and minerals, and the requirements are met. Or if you've got excellent quality pasture and you go, horse is maintaining weight perfectly well on pasture, which for a lot of people is the case when you've got really good quality pasture. Even horses in a decent amount of work will be able to maintain their body weight, and that's great if you can do that. But you just have to remember that copper, zinc, selenium and iodine in Australian pastures are almost always low. So in the Hunter and in Queensland over the last 4 or 5 years, we've looked at, I've looked at about 500 or 600 pasture samples, like analyses from individual paddocks, and I'm yet to see a pasture that can actually meet these requirements for a horse, and even a horse not doing very much, let alone a horse that's in a decent amount of work. So those deficiencies are pretty much going to exist in any pasture, no matter how good your pasture quality is. There's going to be mineral deficiencies in there. So this is where you're just feeding balancer pellet. You're not wanting to add calories. All you're wanting to do is just add those minerals there. The crude protein's being flagged as being too high, which for some horses, if this was an endurance horse in a hot climate or an eventer in a hot climate and it was sweating quite heavily and you were feeding that amount of protein, I'd be saying we need to get the protein level down, because when they eat a lot of protein, they urinate a lot, they sweat a lot, they lose a lot of electrolytes and water, and electrolyte deficiency and dehydration and tying up become quite high risk. Or if it was in a stable, I'm sure you've all mucked out stables that absolutely reek of ammonia. That's too much protein, and when the nitrogen comes out in the urine and hits the stable floor, there's bacteria in the stable floor that convert it to ammonia, and that's what you can smell. So it's not having too much. If this horse was stable, that would be an issue as well, but it's obviously out on pasture. So if it's just out on pasture, it's in moderate work, it's not working in a hot climate over long periods of time, we can just politely ignore that. The horse will deal with it if it's got access to plenty of water and salt.